And it was named after Colonel Charles A. Fisher because he was the first field officer killed in the Civil War from the Confederacy. He was killed at the first Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas, and where they go north-south.
Maybe it's blown over. Coming. We're at Fort Fisher, North Carolina, where Chad's a tour guide. Go ahead, I'm getting this picture here.
This is Colonel Lamb here, see on the tab. He was the main commander of the fort. He was from Norfolk, Virginia. Before the war, he had no military experience. He went to college with William and Mary, owned half the newspaper, and was a lawyer. But he was an avid reader and read everything he could get his hands on, especially when it came to the military. And when he was sent to command at the fort in July of 1862, this place had less than 18 cannon inside, which is a small series of disconnected mounds.
Less than 18 cannons.
Yeah. And, but he read about this place called Malakoff Tower in Russia, which was a Crimean War fortification in the 1850s. And this was Malakoff Tower in Russia. It was held as strong. Malakoff Tower.
Did you see Ballhead?
It's a beautiful scenic area here at Fort Fisher.
Mom, we gotta go. Old River Road.
Old River Road, that was the like 421 going into Wilmington. It would take you 3 hours by horse, a day walking.
There were two battles that occurred here at Fort Fisher during the Civil War. The first one was very late in the war. Both of them were very late in the war. The first one was on Christmas of 1864, December 24th through 25th. This first attack here was a failure, and there's a couple of main reasons for this. First and foremost, Grant was not in full favor. General Ulysses S. Grant, that is, head of the Union Army, was not in full favor of an attack on Wilmington. Wilmington and the other port cities were basically neglected throughout the war because they were port cities. General Grant and the Union...
Why were they neglected?
Because the Union High Command was more interested in fighting it out with actual troops like Robert E. Lee. They were more worried about Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson's troops fighting it out in the battlefields of Virginia than they were worried about the ports. They thought it was the Navy's job to take care of the ports. This reason also, the two commanders here in the first expedition hated each other. Both expeditions here were combined operations, combined Navy and Army operations. And the two commanders here, General Benjamin F. Butler, who commanded the Army, and Admiral David D. Porter, hated each other. They never saw each other throughout the entire battle. They just sent orders through subordinates. And Admiral Porter actually started the attack before Butler even got here with his troops. But they did assemble 56 warships and about 6,500 Union troops for the first expedition here. They made their way down from Hampton Roads, Virginia, appeared off the Atlantic side here, and they bombarded this place for over a day with 20,000 shells. And after about over a day's bombardment, a small Union party of troops landed a couple miles at the beach here. They made their way down, and it was basically a reconnaissance mission to see if the fort was ready to be taken. And the idea of the bombardment was to take out these land-based guns so they could charge the fort and it wouldn't be a disaster like as in the movie Glory.
How far out in the ocean were those Yankee ships you think?
They're about a mile. But they have 4 monitors here. Like, you know, the ironclad vessels.
Yeah.
And there are 4 of those here who can anchor 200 yards off the shore.
And you couldn't do anything about it?
Cannonballs bouncing off the side of them. And they pounded this place with 400-pound, 15-inch cannonballs.
Wow.
They don't.
Hey.
But they did bombard. They made their way up, but the problem was the bombardment was not very successful. Again, this is all the first mission here. I'm still sticking on the first attack. They only took out 3 or 4 of these land-faced cannon, and there's a reason for this because Colonel Lamb, in the middle of bombardment, if you imagine you're on a ship a mile out in the water, which most of these warships were, you can't see inside these 30-foot sand walls. So they were shooting at the flagstaffs. and Colonel Lamb, being an idiot, realized this and took the flagstaff and put it in the marsh behind the fort here after it had been shot down 2 or 3 times. So after that, in the rest of the bombardment, most of the Union shells overflew the fort and landed in the Cape Fear River and in the marsh here, harmlessly exploding. So this bombardment was not very successful and the attack was called off. It's considered a complete failure by the Union. It's considered a great victory by the Confederates, basically. But something happened during this first assault here on Fort Fisher that changed Wilmington's fate forever. And this was the fall of Savannah. You guys have well heard of General William T. Sherman's famous March to the Sea. You guys have heard of that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
This was the capture of Savannah, and this happened the day on Christmas Eve, the same day the first day of this battle. And with the fall of Savannah,
The same day as the first day of this battle?
First day of the first battle here.
Oh, okay.
So the fall of Savannah occurred during this first battle.
Okay.
And with the fall of Savannah, this left Wilmington as the single last major seaport open to the Confederacy. So this, for one thing, turned Grant's eyes towards Wilmington, or started to turn his eyes towards Wilmington. But more importantly, also connected with the capture of Savannah. So, now Sherman proposed a plan to Grant. Grant wanted to take Sherman, float him up from Georgia to join himself, Grant, in around Richmond and Petersburg, so they could combine and finish off Robert E. Lee, right? Well, this was Grant's plan, but Sherman came up with a different plan. He wanted to instead turn north on his famous march through the Carolinas, which was Bentonville. That was General Joseph E. Johnston's, who was a Confederate, trying to stop Sherman's march through the Carolinas, but it didn't fail. But Sherman proposed to march north, up through South Carolina, up through North Carolina, on up into Virginia, where he would then join Grant, where they could finally destroy Robert E. Lee. He wanted to just march through the Carolinas and destroy everything he could, which, you know, he destroyed Columbia, a lot of Charleston, a lot of North Carolina. So Grant was fine with this. Grant agreed to this plan. But he wanted to give Sherman a safe halfway point on his march from Savannah, Georgia, up to Richmond, Virginia. And what better place than Wilmington, with its Cape Fear River that's navigable 100 miles inland to Fayetteville, and its 3 major railroads coming in and out of it. So Grant could use these railroads in this river just as Confederates had done throughout the war to distribute supplies and troops. Everybody got that?
Did y'all get that?
But these two things are what really turned the fate on Wilmington. This was now the only seaport left to the Confederacy open for blockade running. Plus, Grant wanted to give Sherman a safe halfway point that he could retreat to if John Bell Hood or somebody over in the Western Theater were to come and try to attack Sherman on his march through the Carolinas. This will be Sherman's retreating point.
Who is John Hood?
John Bell Hood was a famous Confederate commander.
He was Confederate commander, okay.
So these were 2 things. So now Grant fully turned his eyes towards Wilmington. Now he wanted Wilmington bad. And so 2.5 weeks later, after his first attack here, an even greater force made their way from Hampton Roads, Virginia, and made their way down. Just shy of 60 warships with 20 troop transports with about 9,000 Union troops made their way down here again. And there's something bad here happened to the Confederates, because after the first battle here, General Braxton Bragg, as you know, who Fort Bragg was named after, he was the district commander here in Cape Fear. He had ordered 6,000 troops under Robert F. Hoke up to Wilmington for a parade and basically a party. And when these 6,000 troops were still in Wilmington, the Union the Union Armada and the troops showed back up, cutting them off from Wilmington.
So the troops were partying in Wilmington?
6,000 Confederates were partying in Wilmington. There was less than 2,000 inside the fort when they showed
Where
back up.
Hillary Honeycutt got put in jail. Right.
But this would prove to be the largest combined Navy-Army operation in U.S. military history until June 6, 1944, which was D-Day, which the anniversary just passed a few days ago. And
So they were totally unsuspecting of an attack from the Union?
well, basically,
Otherwise they wouldn't be...
General Bragg was stupid enough not to think that, he was stupid enough to think that they would not come back that soon, but they did.
Not very well.
Richmond headlines, when General Braxton Bragg was sent here to take command of the Cape Fear District in October of 1864, the Richmond headlines read, "General Bragg goes to Wilmington, goodbye Wilmington."
Oh no.
It was not well liked in the Confederacy at all. But him and Jefferson Davis were Mexican War buddies.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's how.
He got the command.
But we do need to hurry up because that rain's coming. But like I said, the second attack was renewed, and they shelled this place with another 20,000 shells. This combined 40,000 projectiles fired into Fort Fisher in the 2 attacks here, and that was the most in U.S. military history until the Battle of Jutland in World War I, which was only 50,000 projectiles. But after a 2.5 day bombardment of shells bursting inside the fort here at a rate of 2 per second, that's 120 shells a minute bursting inside here. After this huge, immense bombardment, the Union troops landed up the beach here a couple miles and made their way down. And this time they realized that the fort was ready to be taken. The Union bombardment this time had taken out every single land-faced cannon here, except for one. And that's Mackey shooting from a mile out in the water. But there's only one land-faced cannon left out of the over 20. And so the attack commenced, and the Union broke through with a brigade under Newton Martin Curtis, who was my height at the time, which was huge for the time. We were a lot shorter back then than we were today. But he was a guy, almost 6'7", weighed over 200 pounds. He was a colonel. He led the brigade who broke through over this bridge. There was a bridge here during the day, not this bridge, but it was like a dam built up with planks on top. But they broke through over this bridge, through this marsh here, and very heavy hand-to-hand combat commenced over these first couple of hills here and through this main gate, which we're walking through right now.
Okay.
Gate to the fort. Sallyport is a French name, and everything, just about everything in the United States military at this time was based on the French. Because if you remember, this was just after Napoleon's great reign in Europe in the early 1800s, and it was so successful, everything as far as the military was concerned was based on Napoleon. Even the names, as in Sallyport. The French name just means the opening, what have you. That cannon's named after Napoleon. Tactics were all Napoleonic tactics. What have you. Side land face, this fort was two-sided. It had a land face and a sea face, which all the sea face is now gone. But we have been outside the fort until now. We now came in exactly where the Union breakthrough occurred on the evening of January 15th, 1865. That's a real cannon up here. Yeah, we're going in there a second. These are called bomb proofs. There were 30 of these throughout the fort, usually one at the bottom of each base that you see here. And you guys just joined us, but between every one of these mounds you see on top here, there would have been a battery exactly like this constructed, with 1 or 2 heavy Seacoast cannons sticking out pointing up the beach here, up north of the beach. But there were 30 of these throughout the fort, and you can see on the front right side tab here how they actually look. They went straight back. They didn't go straight back. They were zigzagged and went back into an open room where the troops hid during the massive bombardment that occurred here. And you can see here, these things were zigzagged. And this is for a very specific reason, because just like the trenches in World War I, they weren't designed so if an artillery shell came down and exploded here, fragments would not shoot straight to the back and kill somebody. So just like the trenches in World War I, they were zigzagged. So if a shell exploded, it would embed itself in the walls here. Just like in World War I. If you're in the trenches in World War I, you couldn't get down and see, 100 yards straight down, because they were curved like this to protect against incoming German shells exploding and killing everybody down the line. But these were constructed first. They're made out of palmetto trees from Bald Head Island, which is right up here a couple miles. Bald Head Island is the northernmost point in North America where palmetto trees grow. And Colonel Lowndes specifically sent barges over to Bald Head to get palmetto trees, not pine or oak, because palmetto is very absorbent, very soft tree. It doesn't splinter like pine or oak or what have you. So these could absorb a massive Union bombardment, and they did very well. And the 40,000 projectiles fired in here by the Union fleet off the coast here, it did not damage a single bomb proof, and there were 30 of them throughout the fort. Most of them were connected underground, so this is basically like a little underground tunnel system, if you can imagine. And but most of them have fallen in, they assume. They have not been excavated, but they assume they have. But after the bomb first was built, the sand that you see here, this is totally made of sand here. The sand was piled to desired heights using just wheelbarrows and ramps. That's all, the only thing they used. 500 slaves and 500 soldiers built this fort non-stop from the outbreak of the war until this place was captured in the last 3 months of the war. But all they did, they just had ramps going up and down. They filled their wheelbarrows up and went up and down all day long for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. But then, just as we've all built sandcastles and we know, and that's all this place was basically, was a 1.5 mile long, 30-foot high sandcastle. But as we all know, sandcastles don't last long, right? Well, how Colonel Land remedied this was, you see this marsh grass sitting behind us out in the marsh. Just like we roll down sod today in our front yard, he cut this sod up, laid it on top of the mounds, then sewed it into the ground. So it did its job very well and has held the sand in place for almost 140 years. But also on top of this, it helped further absorb cannonball shots, exploding cannonball shots. Incoming shells. Alright, you got a drink up top?
Dice que necesitaban cortar para con las vías que vinieron los atacantes, ahora necesitaban cortar todo el este atacante que crecía alto.
Basketball, which you can't throw far and not very accurately, they started throwing these football projectiles with side spin on them. So now they can throw projectiles twice as far and twice as accurately, just like you can do a football instead of a basketball. So with this invention, this made brick forts basically obsolete. A brick fort could be taken out in a matter of hours by a couple of rifle cannon. But some of the major forts you think of from the Civil War were brick, like Fort Sumter, Fort Macon here near Atlantic Beach, and Fort Caswell over here on Oak Island. These were all Civil War forts. But these were built early. These were built in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, before rifling became a fad in the military. And just like Fort Sumter, soldiers said Fort Sumter was a better fort at the end of the war than it was the first day it was fired on, which started the Civil War. Because this brick had just crumbled. Fort Sumter was bombarded throughout the war constantly by the Union fleet. It never surrendered throughout the war. Charleston fell to Union hands, but Fort Sumter never surrendered because this place had been bombarded so much. All the brick had crumbled, and all the Confederates did was just keep piling sand and earth on top of it. So it just became more sturdy the more they bombarded this place. And this is the thing about sand forts versus brick and stone and wooden forts. Just like Fort Fisher here, and if you guys have seen Glory, that was about Battery Wagner in Charleston Harbor. That was a sand fort, Confederate fort, just like this one. First and foremost, they were cheap. The Confederacy was economically stretched to its limit throughout the war. And there's nothing more readily available, and there's nothing more of on this planet than earth and dirt and sand. And so this was the first major advantage. But second off, and more importantly, the thing about sand and earth is you can move sand and you can displace sand and earth. But if you fire 40 million shells into this place, you're not going to destroy a single ounce of dirt. You're just going to move it. That's all you're going to do. And so they can bombard this place for 4 or 5 years constantly. And as soon as they leave, all the Confederates would have to do was take their shovels and put the sand right back where it was, as opposed to brick, which crumbles with a couple of shots from a rifle cannon. So that was the whole idea behind sand forts versus brick, especially brick and stone forts and that. But this is Shepherd's Battery that we're standing in. This is the only reconstructed battery that we have here at Fort Fisher. Like I said down there at the bottom, between every one of these mounds that you see, there's a little sunken place at the top. And that's where a battery exactly like this would have stood, with 1 or 2 heavy Seacoast cannons, with this wooden parapet you see with sandbags placed on top. And these, what they call traverses on top here, these huge mounds, these were to protect adjoining and adjacent batteries from, like Shepherd's Battery here. If a shell came in and exploded right where I'm standing, it killed probably everybody inside the battery here. But it would protect everybody standing in this adjoining battery from getting cannon you saw out front when you walked in, these two came off the USS Peterhoff. That was a Union ship sunk by Confederate forces on Bald Head Island, actually, early in the war. So these two cannon that you see in Fort Fisher were not inside here during the battle or during the war, but about half the cannon inside Fort Fisher were exactly like this. This is what we call a 32 pounder. Now, as you guys can look at it and tell me, the thing does not weigh 32 pounds, right? This thing weighs 6,000 pounds. Just the tube here, not the carriers. The carriers weigh several thousand pounds itself too, or combined over 10,000 pounds. But these things fired a 32-pound ball is all they did. You can imagine a 32-pound bowling ball, it's about what they fired. Unfortunately for the Confederates, these cannon, which most of them were like inside here, were not very modern cannon for the day. They've been around for years. But they did have a couple of modern artillery pieces inside here at Fort Fisher. They have one cannon called the Armstrong cannon that you guys can see a picture of inside. It's a very funky looking cannon. It looks like it's pieced together. It starts out real big, then another piece here and another piece here, and slowly goes down. These things can fire about 6 miles out into the ocean. These 32 pounders can only fire about 2 miles. This 32 pounder is a smoothbore. It's not a rifle cannon. Now the rifle ones can fire almost 4 miles. But this Armstrong cannon I'm talking about can fire almost 6 miles out into the ocean. It was on the sea-face side. And Confederate soldiers said if they could see a Union warship out in the ocean, or a Union blockading ship, that they could fire at it and they could probably hit it after a couple of shots. But once again, the Confederacy was so strained during the war, they only had 13 shells for the Armstrong cannon during the first attack here, and they shot all those in the first attack, so the cannon remained silent in the second attack. There are also a couple of guns in here, well actually they're rifles called Whitworth rifles. Very long, very slender cannons. And they fire just a solid iron bolt, about this big, like a football basically. And they can fire over 6 miles out into the ocean. And these are the most feared guns these are guns most feared by the Union sailors out on the ships. But one common falsehood I'd like to talk about just for a minute, as far as the Civil War goes, when you see Civil War movies or even Revolutionary War movies like The Patriot that just came out not too long ago, in these battle scenes you always see these incoming cannonballs, and when they come down they hit the ground, they explode. You see all these people, you know, being thrown everywhere, what have you. Well, this wasn't how it worked back then. Now, they did have impact detonation devices on cannonballs. This was a new invention around the outbreak of the Civil War, but the gunners hated them because these things were so primitive back then. You gotta imagine if you're what you call a powder monkey carrying the ammunition up to the cannon, if you drop this thing, these impact detonation devices on those cannonballs are gonna explode. You're going to kill everybody in your whole gun crew. So they did not use them hardly at all. Very scarcely used in Civil War. Most of these cannonballs, they were not solid either. They were not solid iron balls like you might think they were. These were actually, for the most part, filled with gunpowder, and even inside they put bullets and shell anything that could be used as a shrapnel or fragments. So, and these things actually had timed fuses on them. Is how they exploded. The idea wasn't to shoot artillery shells and for them to land and to explode. That wouldn't happen unless the fuse happened to go off at the exact time the shell hit the ground, which was not often. The idea of artillery at the time was you shot these shells and you want to explode them over the head of your enemy, raining down the shrapnel on top of your enemy with the fragments of the iron cannonball. This was the idea of artillery at the time, not shooting solid iron balls. They would use solid iron balls in some instances, such as shooting at ships way out in the water, like with the Whitworth bolts. But most of these were balls filled with gunpowder and fragments, and even bullets. So when they exploded, they would shoot these bullets and fragments down everywhere. If I got it? All right.
Got it.
Come on down this way. Something I forgot to talk about at the top was what the Union had. I talked about what the Confederates had inside here. There were approximately 50 of these cannons, most of them a lot like this one that you see up here, inside Fort Fisher. Now on the Union fleet that bombarded this place with almost 60 warships, they had 627 cannon on board versus almost 50 inside here. And what I was telling these guys earlier was the Union have 4 monitors here too, which were the ironclad vessels that were basically unstoppable during the day. They have 4 of these here, and on board these monitors, they had cannons that fired 15-inch, 400-pound cannonballs. That thing fires a 32-pound ball. They were firing 400-pound explosive cannonballs into this place. But that's what Confederates were up against. And they were bursting in here at a rate of 2 per second, or 120 per minute, throughout 2.5 days here, before the Union infantry attacked here.
Were most of the soldiers killed? The Confederate soldiers.
No, most of them stayed in bomb proofs throughout the bombardment, but there were more casualties from the actual Union bombardment than there was from the actual infantry assault. There were a little over 500 Confederate casualties throughout the second battle, but almost 1,500 were captured, because when the Union overran this place, they didn't have where to go. Because you have the ocean on one side.
How many days did the battle last?
2.5, almost 3.
So 500 were killed in 2.5 days in the
that's
Confederacy. Yeah.
There are about 1,500 Union casualties. And one more last note on artillery. Artillery during the time, you might think the artillery guys had it easy. It was totally the opposite. They had one of the most dangerous jobs in the Army and in the Navy. These things, like I said, as we've all played with firecrackers, you know how fuses are. These things go off prematurely all the time, right? Well, the same way with cannonballs, with these primitive fuses they had. They would set the timers, then try to fire the ball, right? Well, these timers went off a lot earlier than expected sometimes. And just in the first Union attack here, there were more Union casualties out there on the ships from their own guns exploding and killing their own sailors than they inflicted on Confederates inside the fort here.
Oh, that's bad.
So that's how dangerous this thing was.
It's not good.
Anybody got any questions about artillery before we leave that? We need to kind of... Nothing. There were just occasional horses stables, or occasional wooden headquarters, and there was the soldiers' barracks down this way, but the rest of it was just dead clear. You could see from here to all the way in the point, past the aquarium down. If you guys have been down the end, you saw Batty Buchanan, the little hill down there with the Confederate flag on top. That was where the Confederates surrendered on this night. They fought. I don't know if you guys heard me talking about the first battle or not over there on the bridge, but the first 2 commanders here hate each other, and was why the first attack basically failed. General Benjamin F. Butler, who was head of the Army, and Admiral David D. Porter, who was commander of the Navy, this was a combined operation of both attacks. They hated each other. That's why this attack failed. Uncoordinated, uncooperative attack. But this man here, General Alfred H. Terry, commanded the Army in the second attack here. He was a very laid-back guy and could basically put up with Admiral David D. Porter. And so the second attack here was very well coordinated. Very cooperative. But after the Union advance broke through here, after a 2.5-day bombardment, the Union came in over that bridge that we walked across. And after 6 hours of hand-to-hand combat fighting at 10 o'clock that night on January 15th, 1865, the Confederates surrendered at the end of the point. They were pushed back throughout the fort, all the way to the end of the point. And they were actually abandoned by their own Confederate Navy. A plan was set up so the Confederate Navy would have ships waiting at the end of the point here in case they had to retreat back there. Ships under a guy named Chapman, who was from the Confederate Navy, was supposed to evacuate troops here at Fort Fisher. Well, about time he saw Union troops coming over these hills here, him and his team packed up, took the ship, even Colonel Lamb's own personal barge. They took that too, went across the river and left all the Confederate troops. Yeah, there were, but the Union warships were on this side. The Confederate Navy was on this side, on the Cape Fear River side, at a dock down here at the end of Federal Point where they're supposed to evacuate the troops. They're supposed to evacuate them across the river over to what they call Smithville. Smithville was Southport back then. Southport wasn't known as Southport until around the turn of the century.
Well, how far were the Union ships out?
About a mile. The wooden ones were 3/4 of a mile to a mile, which isn't far when you're looking out there. And but they did have 4 ironclads here, 4 monitors offshore, and just pound this place with 400-pound explosive bowling balls.
fort extended about another mile.
This land face that we're looking at, we're on the inside land face. This ran almost 700 yards out to your right over here. Then it turned just like an L, a very large L. Then went for over a mile on the sea face that ended down past where the aquarium is today.
That's
So-
something they built.
Oh yeah.
They built that out there.
Oh yeah.
Slaves.
500 slaves and 500 soldiers. 200 wheelbarrows going at the same time.
So how much of the land has fallen to the ocean?
90%.
90%.
All the sea face is gone. 2/3 of the land face is gone. The only part left of this fort is this 10% here, which is only 1/3 of the land face. That you see right here, all over to the ocean.
So how much land is eroded into the ocean?
90% of it. The porter said when this place was captured, well, let me wait for everybody's down here. Like the gentleman was just saying, this was the last southern seaport open to import and vital supplies and ammunition to the Confederate Army. And after this attack I've been telling you about ended at 10 o'clock at night on January 15th, 1865, when the Confederate surrender here at the end of the point, this closed off the port of Wilmington to importing supplies on blockade runs. And just as Admiral David E. Porter said, the lips that feed the Confederacy have been sealed. And Robert E. Lee wrote Confederate President Jefferson Davis many, many times throughout the war and told him that if Wilmington falls, I will not be able to sustain my army in the field, and I will have to evacuate Richmond and Petersburg. And just as Robert E. Lee predicted, shortly after this place, after Fort Fisher was occupied by Union troops, Robert E. Lee had to evacuate his Richmond Petersburg lines and made his famous retreat across Virginia westward, where he surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant on April 9, 1865. But the fall of Wilmington here was not the doom of the Confederacy, as it may sound to be, in the sense of the word. The Confederacy has been long doomed before this, if not at Gettysburg, where General Robert E. Lee's advance to the north was repelled. It probably was the fall of Atlanta in September 1864. This was just the final gasp of breath for the Confederacy. This was the final straw that broke the Confederacy's back. This was the final nail in the coffin of the Confederacy's coffin. And with the capture of this place, the main objective of Wilmington, see, Fort Fisher was not the main objective here in the Union assault. Fort Fisher was the stepping stone to taking that city 20 miles up the peninsula here, Wilmington. And a little over a month later, on February 22nd, Wilmington was captured. But less than 9 days later, the war was over. Now this was not directly the cause of the fall of Wilmington, but it had a lot to do with it. Robert E. Lee did have to evacuate Richmond and Petersburg because he was starving. He had no more supplies coming in from the Wilmington-Weldon Railroad here in Wilmington. So this had a lot to do with the end of the war, but this was not the end of the war. Like I said, the end of the war.
Why was Wilmington so valuable to the Union? Why did they want to capture Wilmington so badly?
For two main reasons. First and foremost, to close off, this was the last major seaport open to the Confederacy for importing supplies on these blockade runners. So just see, they had set out from the start of the war to do this. They had what they called the Anaconda Plan, which was to blockade the entire southern coastline and to slowly squeeze them to death, just like an anaconda, to starve them, to squeeze them to death. And this was the last major port open. This one reason. But the second reason was Grant wanted to give Sherman, like I was talking about earlier, he wanted to give Sherman on his famous march through the Carolinas, he wanted to give Sherman a safe halfway point between Savannah, Georgia and Richmond, Virginia, where he was headed. And so with these three major railroads coming out of Wilmington and the Cape Fear River here leading 100 miles inland, if the Union could get control of these, they could use them to distribute supplies and troops, just like the Confederates had done throughout the entire war at that point. That's why they wanted to do it. That's all I got. You guys got any questions? Anything?
Thanks for the information.
Yes, sir. And and then over across the street onto the bluff overlooking the ocean. If anybody wants to go with me, I mean, come on, guys, hang around.
You're so good with that.
For you guys who missed the early part of the tour, I'm just going to do a quick rewind here. This fort was two-sided. This was a land face that we're seeing here, that you can see, that's on the left. And then it went out for a couple hundred more yards here. This land face was almost 700 yards in all. This is probably what, you guys can help me out here, what, 200? Yeah. Maybe 200 yards. So it went for about over 400 more yards out. Then it cornered with the sea face at what they call the northeast bastion. Called bastion. Then it ran for over a mile. If you guys can look out there and imagine, ran for over a mile straight down, all the way past. Everybody can see where that beach ends down there at the corner. That's how large this fort was. And like I said, this is 10% of what the fort was right here. But I want to come up here and because this is the closest point I can get you to the corner of this is far out on the Fort Fisher we can go today. But in the second attack here, which was the only important attack, the first attack was a failure. In the second attack, almost 60 warships, 60 huge Union warships with over 627 cannon on board these ships. Not each ship, but combined they had 627 cannons. They appear right behind where I'm pointing here. It's spread out in battle formation over a couple mile stretch here out in the ocean. They went in battle formation and pounded this place for over 2.5 days with over 20,000 projectiles. And then after the commenced bombardment, an organized two-pronged attack was commenced. This, as I said, this was a two-pronged attack. One prong was the regular army, as you guys might have heard me talking about earlier, that advanced through over the bridge and over this western end of the fort here. Well, the other prong was actually 2,000 sailors and marines. It's volunteers from off the decks of these Union warships who want to be part of the great epic adventure of Fort Fisher. Well, they attacked at what we call the northeast bastion at the corner of the sea and land face out here a couple hundred yards to my left in front of you. Well, these guys attacked first. They were supposed to attack simultaneously with the regular Union Army, but they got mixed up and they attacked first. And these guys were slaughtered. These guys, this was the first United States Marines repulse in history, in military history. First time the United States Marines were ever repulsed was right up here off the northeast bastion. And they were slaughtered, basically. This was for a very good and specific reason. Admiral David D. Porter, who was in charge of these men, armed these guys with 6 shooting revolvers in one hand and a marine sword in the other, what they call cutlasses. That's all these guys had. And like a sailor said after the battle, David Porter might as well give me a broomstick to try to charge this fort with. So that's what these guys had to fight. They Confederates on top here with aimed rifle muskets and aimed cannons coming down. But these guys were slaughtered basically. But at the same time, and that mercenary tactic, and the regular Union Army was able to break through on this low end here, while the most Confederates were occupied with the Marines and sailors up here. So I just want to carry up here so you get an idea, if you can look out to the ocean, of what it would have looked like almost 140 years ago today. For a mile stretched out here would have been 60 warships and 20 troop transports, firing just as fast as they could at points exactly where we're standing. With some of these projectiles being these 400-pound explosive cannonballs coming off these monsters. But that's about all I got for you there. And, you guys got any last questions?
They get the one how could they couldn't carry it so easy on one ship?
Yes, sir. That's a very good point. They did not carry that many, but you got to think about it. These Union ironclads weighed thousands of tons in the first place, so they could carry a heavier load than what could a light wooden ship, like the regular Union warships out here. But they did have resupply ships coming back and forth, reloading these ships, and they're actually based. Their nearest base was at Beaufort, North Carolina here, and that's when they ran out of supplies. These supply ships would run supplies back and forth, basically. That's what they would do.
So the boats that were carrying the 400-pound balls were made out of what?
These are what they called ironclad vessels that you guys might have heard. They're called monitors back in the time. All they were armored ships. This was a new invention in the Civil War, and they were basically invincible during the day. They basically couldn't be sunk from a regular cannon shot, basically. So these cannons that were mounted right here where we're standing, shooting at these 4 monitors, and you're a couple hundred yards offshore here. But these cannonballs are bouncing almost off the side of them, doing no damage whatsoever, making a couple of dents and bursting a couple of the rivets holding the boat together. No serious damage. Now, there was some serious damage done to Union boats out here by Confederate counterfire, but not very much. Not a single ship was sunk. There were some Union sailors killed by Confederate counterattacking shells, but no serious damage. Anybody else got any questions?
And I said, and they told me to say frog and yell it. And then one day we was Herman of the frog, and I was like,
Frog! Here's the entrance sign to Fort Fisher. We've just spent 2 hours with Chad. We've just spent 2 hours with Chad doing the tour where he's working this summer at Fort Fisher. It is the month of June 2001. Chad just turned 22 and he's majoring in history, and Dr. Chris Fomble helped get him a job here this summer.